Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my July wrap up, which is my best reading month ever. So in the month of July, I absolutely smashed it. I read not more books than I've ever read in a month before, but more pages, which is how I calculate like how much I read. I go off pages, not books, because while I've read as much as 15 books in a month, usually when I read that much, there's normally a couple of comics or novellas and things that are just typically shorter than your standard novel. But in the month of July, I read 11 standardly formatted, like standard books, and I'm blown away that I actually managed to do it, and I don't think I struggled too much either throughout the month. So getting straight into the statistics, in the month of July I read 11 books, which added up to a total of 4,855 pages, and this broke down to an average of 156 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 1 2-star, 4 3-stars, 5 4-stars, and only 1 5-star this month, and the average rating was 3.54 stars per book. So quality wise, the quality was solidly good throughout the month, but there wasn't much in there that I really loved or blew me away. For the demographics, we had 4 young adult books, 3 new adult books, and 4 adult books. For the formats, we don't have a whole ton of variety. I read 10 standardly formatted books and 1 ebook. For the genres, once again, we surprisingly don't have a ton of variety. I read 6 fantasy books, 3 romance, and 2 science fiction. And lastly, for the places where I sourced all of these books from, 7 of them I have hauled in 2021. Only 3 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2021, and 1 of them I read on Amazon Prime Reading, which is kind of like Kindle Unlimited but for Prime customers. I did have 1 DNF in the month of August, which I'm going to touch upon briefly, and that was the 100 by Cass Morgan. This came up on Bookopoly as a chance card. It was part of my own whole project, so it was a book that I was unsure if I was going to like anyway, but this is a young adult sci-fi that follows 100 juvenile delinquents who live, I think they live in ships orbiting Earth after humanity fled Earth many years ago because of like environmental stuff and also like nuclear war, and these 100 juvenile delinquents have been sent back to Earth to see if it is habitable for humans again. So I made it halfway through this one. I was interested in the plot. I wanted to know what they were going to find on Earth and what the actual plot of this book was, but by the time I got halfway through, it was just relationship drama. Like, you're following 4 teenagers in here. One of them was in a relationship with the other one, and then they ended up in the juvenile delinquent facility, so the other one has purposefully got themselves put in there so they can go down to Earth as well. One of them is the brother of another one. One of them was supposed to be on the ship but it was in love with this boy, so she snuck off when a distraction was happening, and it kept going into flashbacks about their relationships, and I just wasn't buying it. Like, the focus of this book was not where I wanted it to be. I wanted to learn more about the plot, and also I don't buy relationships that, apart from like, you know, like parental and sibling relationships, but I don't buy like romantic relationships that I don't see develop on the page, and it just wasn't cutting it for me with all of these flashbacks, so I did DNF this one halfway through. The first book that I read in the month of July was Blood Witch by Susan Dennard. This is book 3 in the Witchland series, and I have been reading these books because I am a co-host of the Witchlands Along read along that is hosted by Jade over at Jade Ray Reads. So this is a young adult, new adult fantasy series, and in the very first book we are primarily following a young truth witch called Safi, and she has the ability to tell whether people are lying or telling the truth, which is a very coveted ability. One day she runs into a blood witch called Adrian who has the ability to scent people's blood and track them across vast distances, and Safi has been trying to keep her abilities on the down low. So when Adrian scents her blood, Safi and her best friend Iseult then go on the run, and this sends them catapulting like head first into this political plot line that centers around a 20-year treaty that is about to be coming to a close. So I gave this one 3 stars, but my thoughts are kind of a little bit mixed on it, because in terms of all of the books I've read from the Witchland series so far, I would say that this one is my favorite, and Adrian is one of my favorite characters in the series. After reading the novella last month, I really like where this took some of the plot points from that novella, because I feel like the novella is the most insightful book that we've actually had in the entire series, and I enjoyed getting a greater understanding of a little bit of the politics, but mainly the underlying magical plotline of of this series. However, I expected a lot more from this with it being the third book in the series. I feel like the Witchland series is just a whole ton of more and more questions with very little answers, and I was hoping that we would get some of those answers in this book, which we didn't really. I also feel like the focus of this book was a little bit odd because right at the beginning we have three characters who are off to do something which is integral to the magical plotline of this series, but after the beginning of this book we don't see them again until the very end. So we have been following the main cast of characters in this series as they are all chasing different plot lines while the actual main plot line is happening somewhere else, not on the page, with different characters. I didn't like what this book did to one of my favorite characters of the series. I'm kind of confused about his perspective now. I don't really know what's going on with him, but I am interested to see what happens to his plotline in Witch Shadow based on the events at the end of this one. And then a lot of this book felt a little bit tedious because all of the characters in here are unreliable narrators. They've been separated pretty much since the beginning of the series and they're all off doing their own different things, so they all have a different level of knowledge of the truth of actually what's going on throughout the plot of this. And I feel like at the third book in the series it's just getting a little bit tedious reading all of this conflicting information and the same event from different characters' perspectives when all of the events are conflicting because none of them have had a chance to regroup and talk to each other. So I'm hoping that the characters can actually come together at some point so they can iron out everything that they currently know about the plot, and then we can move forward with more of a straightforward narrative going into the final book in the series, which will be book 5. So that's kind of my hope for Witch Shadow, but I really wanted to see a little bit of that in this book and sadly it did not happen. So I give this one 3 stars. This is definitely not my favorite fantasy series ever. I really like some of the characters, I really like some of the elements of the plot, but I just find it to be very fast paced with very little like detailed world building, and because of the amount of complexity in the politics and the magic a little bit, I would really appreciate it if the story slowed down in parts to make everything about the series a little bit stronger, if that makes sense. The next 4 books I read in July I can talk about all together because I read the entire Ember Quartet by Sabatier. I did a full non-spoilery reading vlog on this as well if you would like more detailed non-spoiler thoughts as I go through each and every book in this series, but I'm just going to be pretty much talking about it as a whole and giving you a little bit of insight about each individual book in my wrap up. This is a series that is published as adult in the UK and YA in the US, and I will say that it does read very YA. It has a lot of young adult themes, it has a young adult writing style. Most of it is very simple and easy to understand in terms of like the magic and the politics in here, but it does have some adult themes. There are quite a lot of themes of sexual assault and torture in here, and a lot of the torture elements can be quite graphic. But the Ember Quartet predominantly follows a young girl called Laya whose brother is captured for treason and is set to be executed. So Laya's brother is the last existing family member she has, so she does everything she can to get her brother freed before he is executed, and this includes joining a scholar rebellion. Now in this world there is a little bit of a caste system. The scholars are very much oppressed and the marshals are at the top of the pile, so a lot of this plot is about the scholars trying to overthrow the martial empire, which is very heavily inspired and structured like the Roman Empire. So when Laya meets with the scholar rebellion, they say that they will help her free her brother providing that she spies on the prestigious Blackcliff Academy for them, and the Blackcliff Academy is the place where they send the most gifted teenagers in this realm to train to be like the soldiers and commanders in armies. We do have another main perspective in here, and that is Elias, and he is a soldier at this academy, but he's very much thinking about leaving. He doesn't believe in a lot of what the academy stands for, and he pretty much has had enough and wants out. And then we also have a third prominent character in here who is my favorite, and that is Helene, who is another soldier at this academy, and she is a little bit more of the morally grey character who believes in following the rules, believes in following the structure of society, and she truly cares about the people of the empire, and she thinks that she is doing her best by them. So the first book I really liked. I gave it 4 stars. It has a lot of tropes that I really enjoy though. It has this military academy setting, which we do see quite a bit of. It has the underground spy network in the form of the Scholar Rebellion and Laya being a spy, which I really enjoyed. And there is also a series of trials, which is the bulk of the structure of this book. So I really loved all of those elements in this one. I enjoyed Sabatier's writing. My only real complaint about this is that within the the writing, it was a touch too melodramatic and had me rolling my eyes a little bit. But aside from that, I enjoyed the majority of the characters. Elias was my favorite perspective. I really liked Helene straight from the beginning, and I really appreciate that Sabbaty here throughout this series does not pull any punches. There is a lot of brutality and really sad stuff that happens in this series, and I really appreciated that, and I think it added a level of realism to it. Book 2 of the series, A Torch Against the Night, I also thought was really good. I didn't think it was quite as good as the first one though, so I did give this one 3 stars. The third one, Reaper at the Gates, was my absolute least favorite. I gave this 3 stars. There were elements of it that I enjoyed, but I think that around this point, Sabbaty here started to destroy one of my favorite characters, and it feels like she really wrote herself into a hole with that. And then Sky Beyond the Storm, I also gave 4 stars to, because I thought that the conclusion was epic, but the first half of this was trying to get this character that I felt had just been completely ruined to a place where they could actually take part in the story again. It contained some plot twists that really surprised me and had me almost tearing up in a few parts. Now, I will say that in terms of the character work, what became very apparent as we got further into this series is that the villains in this series are much more well developed than the actual main cast of characters. So the points that I nearly teared up in this one was because of the villains, because it has a very morally grey tone throughout this series. Like, good and evil isn't black and white. There are shades of grey all the way throughout, and some of the villains, the things that they are doing it for a reason that you can believe in, like you understand their motivations. So one of my favorite things about this is how well done the antagonists were. I just kind of wish that the main characters were as developed as those antagonists. I also didn't buy how easily the characters believed in magic in this series, because it starts off very solidly as a martial fantasy and magic creeps in throughout the series, and it's supposed to be mythological, and the characters just don't seem to be reacting to this. They don't seem surprised or interested. They're just kind of taking it in their stride, and I did feel like they pretty much took everything in their stride throughout this. We didn't have a whole ton of people reacting to things. Like when people died, there wasn't a whole ton of time took to reflect on that, where they actually spent time in their feelings because of the events of this series, which bothered me quite a bit because I didn't feel like that was particularly realistic. But overall, I would say definitely read An Ember in the Ashes if you are interested. Try A Torch Against the Night. If you don't like A Torch Against the Night, you may as well give up on this series. But I think that An Ember in the Ashes for sure is a solidly good book. And I'm glad that I finally read this series, because I had An Ember in the Ashes on my shelves for a good like 3-4 years. I then read Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Tawny Man series. The Tawny Man series is the third trilogy in the realm of the Eldlings, and it is a continuation of the main character from the first trilogy story, Fit Chivalry Farcia. So obviously I can't tell you too much about this book in this series in particular, but the Fit stories in the realm of the Eldlings follow this young boy called Fit Chivalry Farcia, who is dumped on the doorsteps of the keep when he is 6 years old by his maternal grandfather, who wants him to return to his father. Now, Fitz is the bastard son of the prince in waiting, Prince Chivalry, and when Chivalry finds out that Fitz is on his way, he abdicates the throne and moves to the countryside. So from this moment, nobody really knows what to do with Fitz, and he is partially raised by the stable master Boric up until he comes to an age where he's a little bit more capable, and the king takes an interest in him and decides to train him as the royal assassin. So the second trilogy takes place 15 years after the end of the first trilogy, so we start off with Fitz being 35, and this series focuses a lot more on the magical factions of the world. The two types of magic are the wit and the skill. The wit is looked down upon, and it is the ability to communicate with animals, and the skill is the ability to communicate with humans, and this is something that is sought after because the royal family are the predominant skill users, and they are always seeking more skill users to strengthen the royalty, essentially. So Golden Fool, I enjoyed. I gave it 5 stars, but I don't think it was as good as the first book in this series, and I don't anticipate it being as good as the third. So this one really delved into relationships, because Robin Hobb books are quite character driven. They are also very slow paced, and as this is the 5th book that we are following Fitz in, and also pretty much the character of the Fool as well, we are now deeply attached to Fitz. There are things from the first trilogy that are still unresolved in terms of characters and their relationships, and there are things that have been building from the first trilogy, like little inklings of things that we are wanting to see develop, and a lot of things do come to a head in here. We saw characters from the Live Ship Traders in here as well, which is the second trilogy that is in a different part of the world. And we also saw some characters that we haven't seen since the first trilogy. Some of the main character dynamics in here really came to a head, and it was super dramatic, a little bit emotional, as we know Robin Hobb to be. And I did really enjoy this one. What I will say is that there's pretty much no plot really in this. It is setting up many different plot threads for the next book in the series, and the first book, Fool's Errand, pretty much caught everyone up to date and was like tied into the first trilogy a lot, and this one really sets it up for the finale of this trilogy, because I believe the last book in this trilogy was thought to be the end of Fitz's story. So what I'm really expecting from that one is it to be super dynamic, very emotional. I think a lot of things are going to come to a head in that one, and this one was pretty much just lining everything up and setting up the plot going into that final installment. I then read my most disappointing book of the month, which was Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline. This is the sequel to Ready Player 1 that nobody asked for and nobody needed. So Ready Player 1 is a virtual reality sci-fi that follows this young boy called Wade Watts in this almost apocalyptic world. Like, the world is just about to be coming to the end. The economy has completely collapsed. The environment's in a terrible state, and everybody escapes to this virtual world called the Oasis to actually get some enjoyment in their lives. So the plot of the first book is that the creator of the Oasis, James Halliday, has died quite a few years prior to the start of the story, and he left a series of Easter eggs in the Oasis, and the first person to solve all of the clues would inherit control of the Oasis and James Halliday's estate. So Wade Watts stumbles across the first one after many years of nobody having any luck, and this starts off a race to complete the Easter egg hunt ahead of this big corporation that want to claim the Oasis just to absorb into their own company and abuse it for a profit. So in the plot of Ready Player 2, the main characters discover a invention that James Halliday didn't release, and it is a headset that attaches to the electrical currents in your brain and allow you to immerse yourself more fully into the Oasis, and you can control your avatar with just a thought. So they decide to release this onto the market, and so shortly afterwards a new quest from James Halliday appears called I think it's the search for the 7 shards of the Siren's soul. Wade is once again racing against the clock to find all of the shards of the Siren's soul before terrible things happen to the people who are currently using the Oasis. I gave this one 2 stars. I really did not enjoy it. There were elements of it that I did like. I really liked the quest element, the search for the 7 shards of the Siren's soul. That's an element that I really loved about Ready Player 1 as somebody who does play video games, especially like RPGs and MMOs. I really love those elements of both of the books in this series, so that was probably my favorite thing about it. However, it took way too long to get into this quest. Like, the first chapter is pretty much a false start that tells you everything that's happened since the end of the first book and gears you up for the book to actually start, for it then to go into a explanation in detail for almost half of the book of everything that has happened as a result of releasing this headset onto the market. And it's just, we were halfway through the book before the search actually began. I have actually made a full non-spoilery or like light spoiler review of this book that's going to be coming up in August, so keep your eyes out for that if you do want like a lot of detail about what I didn't like about this book. I thought it was tedious, indulgent. A lot of the beginning of this book is just all of the things that Wade has done with all of his money, and as he was a character in the first book that came from a very low income background and was really fighting to win this competition, I really just did not like that. He became quite insufferable in the second book. There were elements that were poorly researched in terms of one of the characters who was supposedly returning to England at 17 years old after she'd had like an exchange program year to finish her final year of high school, but in England you finish high school when you're 16, and she was supposed to be going to do her senior year of high school. She was a high school junior. That doesn't exist in the UK, and all of that stuff really bothered me. This book just did not do it for me. But as I said, if you would like further detail on this, I do have a non-spoilery review come in that is like 17 minutes long if you want me to go into detail on exactly what it was that I did not like about Ready Player 2. Next, I read a book that I really enjoyed, which was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I'm so excited to read this book. I've been wanting to read it for such a long time, and I'm so happy that I enjoyed it. So this one is an adult sci-fi where we are following a man called Darrow who is a Red. This series is, or this book at least, is set on Mars, and the Reds are kept underneath the surface of the planet, and they are mining for a substance called helium-3. They believe believe that they are doing this because helium-3 is necessary so that people can terraform the planets and humans can escape the dying planet Earth and move to healthy planets in the solar system. However, it is very clear in here that the Reds are not treated well at all, and Darrow truly believes that he is doing this for a good cause. Like, he thinks that once they've mined all of the helium-3, they will all have wonderful lives on the surface of the planet. However, Darrow's family and his wife are not as disillusioned as he is, and his wife orchestrates her own capture and execution to spur Darrow into action. Because of this, Darrow quickly finds out that everything that he has ever known has been a lie, and the Reds are in fact very oppressed and being treated essentially as slaves, while for hundreds of years the planets have actually been terraformed and people are living grand old fabulous lives on the surface of the planet. So Darrow joins a rebellion and plans to essentially tear the Golds apart from the inside. So I've heard this compared to the Hunger Games quite a lot, and I definitely do agree. The area we're in at first, where the Reds are, was very reminiscent of District 12. There was also like an actual Hunger Games kind of element in here, although I wouldn't say it was super comparable to the Hunger Games in feel. But then there was also an area of this book that was very reminiscent of the Capitol, and a character who was very much like Cinna, which I very much enjoyed at that section. This book is a little bit dense. This is a very well developed sci-fi world, and I will say that while this book is a sci-fi being set in space, it does have a dystopian and also a martial plotline element to it, and the martial elements of this series as well are very much structured based on the Roman Empire, like within An Ember in the Ashes. So I struggled a little bit through the beginning of this because it is very dense. We have a very complex caste system in here. The initial caste system is based on colour, with golds being at the top and reds being at the bottom, but each colour pretty much has their own kind of dialect as well. And then when we get to the area where we're surrounded by a lot of golds, there are caste systems within the golds and also different kinds of dialect within the golds. So it is very believable because of how much work Pierce Brown has put into developing this world and really fleshing out things like the different kinds of dialects and all of the castes, but it does make it a little bit confusing when you are going into it. In terms of my enjoyment of this one, I only started to warm up to it about halfway through. I wasn't too interested in this beginning section with the Reds. I started to enjoy the portion that I said is like the Hunger Games with the Cinna character, and then when we got to the portion where Darrow is among the golds, I started to struggle a little bit again because once again I was learning about all of these different castes and the dialects and stuff. But when I actually got into the meat of the story, I started to really enjoy it. This series has some great characters. Severo is my favorite character so far. I also really love Cassius. The plot twists in here I didn't necessarily see coming. There were some quite angsty moments in here as well, and moments of high drama. So I have Golden Sun on my August TBR. Very excited to read it. I believe that it's a lot faster paced and it takes the series in a different turn, but I think it could be a 5-star prediction based on what I've read in here. I think the beginning of the series is a struggle, and then when you get through that struggle area, I think that the series has potential for me to thoroughly enjoy it. And then I finished out the month by reading a whole ton of romance. So the first one I read was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This one is a new adult female romance with a sci-fi twist, and we are following a young woman called August who has just moved to New York City, and she ends up getting an apartment with this bunch of crazy roommates who I think actually the side characters were my favorite elements of this story. And on her commute to college and back every day, she meets this girl on the train called Jane, and it very quickly becomes apparent that Jane is actually from 1976 and she has been stuck on this train for like 40-50 years. So I gave this one 4 stars. I find that Casey McQuiston's books are a little bit too long, and I also find the chapter length a real struggle because some of the chapters in here are 40 pages, and while I'm no stranger to long chapters, I definitely don't expect it from romance, and I do think that the pacing can be a little bit slow and tedious because of that. I didn't love August as well. Like, I liked her, she was okay, but I didn't feel like I really connected with her to get into the story, and I do feel like that is integral within a romance, to find something about the main character that you really enjoy so that you begin to root for like the relationship and stuff. I did really enjoy Jane though, and I enjoyed elements of the romance of this, but I definitely think the strength is in the side characters in here. One of my favorites was a drag queen called Annie, who was just a wonder to behold. We also had Nico, who is a psychic, Mila, who is this kind of chaotic art student, and and Wes, who is like, he comes from old money but he's been disinherited, and he's like the quiet character that you slowly grow to love throughout here. Something that I did really enjoy about this book as well is that the sci-fi elements are well grounded. The thing that I was most worried about in this book is that the reasons why Jane was stuck on the train and what they were going to do about this was going to be like a really quick, underdeveloped, like love conquers all kind of moment, which, don't get me wrong, that does definitely play into it, like the love conquers all kind of theme, but it did go into like some time travel elements, and as somebody who is a fantasy and sci-fi reader, I truly appreciated that the time was actually put into those to make them kind of believable. We did also have some super cinematic moments in here in terms of the romance. There was also a lot of talk about events that happened in the history of the queer community in here, with Jane being from the 70s, and just how the queer community was treated in the 70s in comparison to today. This book was also just a celebration of the LGBTQIA+ community, with all different elements of like gender and sexuality represented, and I thought that this really brought New York to life as well, especially with those elements of celebration of the queer community in here. So Casey McQuiston, still not my favorite author. There are elements that I don't like about both of their books, but this was a decent read. It was nice, it was funny in parts, it was uplifting, and yeah, I enjoyed it. I then read a book that I really expected to love, and sadly I did not, and that was At Your Eve, Each Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the final book in the Brown Sisters series, which is a series of adult rom-com style romances, and each book follows one of the Brown sisters, with this one following the youngest sister, Eve. So Eve Brown does not really succeed at anything. She gives up on everything she tries, and after giving up on an events planning business that she has, her parents cut her off and say that it's time for her to actually put some work into something, get her own place to live like her sisters have, work on a career like her sisters are doing, and just get her life together essentially. So this makes Eve really emotional, and she ends up driving out to the Lake District and stops to get some food, and there she stumbles across a B&B that is looking for a chef. So on a whim, she goes in to have an interview, and she meets the owner of the B&B, Jacob, who instantly takes a disliking to her, and they just really don't get on, so she leaves. Jacob has a change of heart, wants to offer her the job, and she accidentally runs him over with her car, which leads to her feeling obligated to stay while Jacob is recovering from the concussion and fractured wrist that she gave him. So shockingly, I didn't love this one quite as much as the other two. I gave the first two installments in this series 5 stars. I read this because it was a 5-star prediction. I expected to adore this, but I gave it 3 stars. One thing that I really love about this series is that it's very, very funny. It's like a evolution of the humor in the Georgia Nicholson books by Louise Renison. So if you read those as a child or a teenager, then you will like Talia Hibbert's books, because it has the same like unexpected, bizarre kind of humor, and this one just wasn't funny. And I only realized when I got right to the end, where there was a line that made me laugh out loud, that I had not laughed throughout the entirety of this book. I feel like it was trying a little bit too hard with some of the banter. I found the romance cheesy in here, which is something that has not happened throughout the first 2 installments of this series. And in terms of the 2 characters, I didn't like Jacob starting out, but he did grow on me throughout the book. But with Eve, I just didn't gel with her, and I think that that is one of the main contributing reasons to why this book wasn't a huge hit with me. This book does discuss autism. Jacob is autistic, and I really enjoyed those discussions throughout here. I really enjoyed the conflict in this book as well, and I think that the smut scenes were really good and some of the best throughout the series as a whole. But sadly, Eve Brown was not it for me, and I can now say that my favorite book in the series is the second one, Danny Brown. Glad that I read these though. I'm really glad that I read this series, and I'm excited for the next series that is going to be like this, that follows the Montrose siblings, which were introduced in this book, and based on what I've seen of them so far, I'm really interested to see what happens with those characters. And then the final book I read in the month was an ebook, and that was Punk 57 by by Penelope Douglas. Earlier in the month I binged Sex Life on Netflix, absolutely adored it, and I was really in the mood for some just like angsty, problematic, super dramatic, on again, off again kind of romance, and this definitely delivered. So this one is a new adult contemporary romance following Misha and Ryan. Misha and Ryan have been pen pals since they were 11, and they have never met. They don't know what each other looks like. They only live one town apart as well, so they could meet up at any time, but they never have, and they're preserving this relationship through letters that they've had for 7 years. Now Misha is in a band, and his band are having a fundraiser one night, and it includes a scavenger hunt where you do like photo and video submissions. So Misha is checking out the submissions on Facebook when he finds that there has been one submitted by Ryan. So he clicks on his profile, finds out what she looks like, and he finds her there but doesn't tell her who he is, and just like has a conversation with her, you know, they get talking, and then he stops writing to her for 3 months and she has no idea what happened to him. And then after the first chapter we flash forward to this 3-month period where Misha has turned up at Ryan's school using a fake name. He is using the name Mason, and they just take an instant dislike to each other. He's like the emo tattooed bad boy with a lip ring, and she is this prissy cheerleader, and he is really struggling to reconcile this snotty, awful cheerleader with the girl that he has come to know for 7 years, who is like kind and intelligent and has a lot of passion and creativity, and this girl that he's coming to know at the school is just not any of those things. So this has problematic elements. It is a bully romance. They are truly awful to each other for a whole portion of this book, but there is this underlying sexual tension throughout that I really enjoyed. I really enjoy Penelope Douglas's smut. I have also read Birthday Girl and I thoroughly enjoyed that as well. This is set in a high school as well, but both characters are 18 years old and about to graduate, so it is like smutty. It is a mature reader kind of book, not a young adult book. And yeah, I really love those angsty dramatic vibes, and you know me with romance, that is generally what I'm looking for in romance, just some super dramatic, over the top ridiculousness. I gave it 4 stars because I think towards the end it was a little bit too much into that drama and angst, and we had a lot of unnecessary angst going on a little bit. And I will say that in comparison to Birthday Girl, it's not as well written, but I think Punk 57 might have been one of the first books that she did write, so that is kind of expected. Within the type of romances that they are, Punk 57 is definitely more kind of thing with this like emo tattooed bad boy, like yes please. Whereas Birthday Girl, the reason why I gave it 4 stars is because I personally just don't like age gap romances. It's not my personal taste, like significantly older men, whereas Punk 57 fell more into the kind of thing that I personally as a human being enjoy. So yeah, would recommend that if you're interested. I had a great time, flew through it, was absolutely obsessed, and it was definitely what I needed in the moment. So there you have it. Those are all 11 books and my 1 DNF from the month of July. I don't think I'm going to top this in August, because normally when I read a lot I follow it by a month where I don't do quite so well, but I have a whole ton on my August TBR, so please pray for me that I can actually bring this mojo throughout August as well, because I'm gonna need it. But down in the comments, please let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Please also do let me know what your favorite book of July was. But aside from that guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Etsy for that, and the Instagram, as well as a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.